I think a lot of us don't realize or recognize that a lot of what holds us back in our professional world isn't the lack of degrees, the lack of experience, the lack of some technical specific skill. It's actually the appearance of those deep internal personal wounds in our professional space. And we've gotten really good at professionally masking our personal wounds, our humanity in a professional space, but we haven't gotten really good at healing it and actually getting rid of those personal wounds. I don't know if getting rid is the right word, but healing through those personal wounds so that they don't show up at work. The thing is, we can't ignore them as much as we try, as much as we think, if I just put my head down and I work really hard and I work on my technical skills and I work on my leadership skills and my communication skills, I'm going to get really good at my job and I'm going to succeed and I'm going to get all the promotions and I'm going to have that career that I really want. But that's just not true. In terms of leadership, whenever I've seen a leader that I can truly tell has a very grounded sense of self-worth and is very confident in themselves and have worked through a lot of deep personal trauma, I can see it in the way that they lead, in the way that people follow them, in the way that they influence, versus those leaders that still have those insecurities within them, even though they still have the title because they did the put your head down and work really hard to get there. But they get triggered so easily. They have a hard time keeping the respect of their project team or their group, their company, whoever it is. The people respect them because of the title, not because they are an inherent leader. So, the way for us to break that cycle of continuing to bring those personal wounds into your professional life because they're holding you back. And let's be honest, they're holding us back in our personal life as well. But we're concentrating on how it shows up in that personal life is by having this radical self-awareness and by starting to recognize the patterns where they're showing up. So, first off, what do I mean by internal personal wounds? To me, those are those emotional patterns that were created by those early experiences in your life, and they could be good and they could be bad. And when we talk about wounds, we mean about the ones that caused trauma, that caused you to go into survival mode very early in your life. And because of that, they kind of shaped who you are. They shaped your self-worth. They shaped how you move through the world. And they show up probably very clearly in your personal life, but less clearly in your professional life. They show up in ways you wouldn't even think in your professional careers. For example, by being a perfectionist, by being afraid to speak up. They can show up as abandonment wounds. They can show up as people pleasing and overcompensating. They show up as you feeling unsafe in a very safe place, which is something that I relate to a lot. I was stuck in survival mode 10 years after I had already created a safe life for myself. And that kept showing up and showing up and showing up in my professional career and holding me back in ways that I never thought was true, because I refused to believe that my degrees and how hard I worked and my experience wasn't what was going to get me to where I wanted to be in my career. I didn't recognize, it took me a long time to recognize that it was actually those personal wounds that were showing up at work that were holding me back. And the reason it's so hard to recognize, it's because they're very subtle at work, right? It's not like you're going to start crying in a meeting because something triggered you. It's more like something triggered you and you likely said something you didn't mean and it was a little too harsh and your team kind of took it the wrong way. It'll show up in subtle ways where maybe you get triggered and your lack of emotional regulation prevented you from being able to respond in a calm manner, right? And because you were triggered and you didn't respond in a calm manner, now your team respects you a little bit less. So, first thing you need to do is stop being afraid to look into the mirror. Start really that deep, radical self-awareness and start recognizing patterns. This part takes a lot of vulnerability and a lot of courage to be able to say, okay, you know what? I messed up there and I got triggered there and I had zero emotional regulation and obviously I need to work on that. It's really hard to think that way. It's easier to blame whatever situation was for triggering you versus taking accountability for it. So, some examples of ways that personal wounds show up at work for a lot of us. First, overreaction. Again, that lack of emotional regulation to something that triggered you that was probably really small. Maybe someone disagreed with your point of view and they disagreed with, I don't know, whatever you wrote in the scope, but because you had spent so much time writing that scope, now you're triggered because now it feels like that disagreement is a reflection on you, is a reflection on the fact that you made a mistake and therefore a reflection on your self-worth. And now you have this big emotional reaction and you've kind of blown it out of proportion when really it was just a discussion of why do you think that? Let me show you why I think it should be this way, and then finding a common ground. Other more subtle ways of overreacting, which definitely happened to me, is getting really, really anxious to send an email. I don't know, maybe that email required some sort of input from the other person because of some problem or some issue that was going on a project. Or maybe that email was explaining a direction that was different what was previously agreed to, and you knew that there was going to be some backlash against that. But now you are frozen in place. You feel very anxious. Your hands start sweating and you kind of just spiral. You spiral, right? Internally, because no one is seeing this other than yourself. But that is also an overreaction. And the thing about spiraling and overreacting, they're always kind of a result of feeling a specific way that triggers a failing mechanism, like feeling like your identity or your self-worth is what is being judged here. Like you feel like you failed, like it's your fault that you failed. It's not let's look at the project that we're working on. What are the factors here? No, it's not about that. It's about how you as a person, your identity is being judged and how right now you're failing. Next way that it can potentially show up at work is by avoiding conflict. If you're like me and you grew up in the survival mode, conflict feels very hard. It freezes you in place. It makes you scared. It makes you shake. It makes you really, really uncomfortable. And yeah, conflict is uncomfortable. It's always going to be uncomfortable. But if you're trying to move your career into leadership, into whatever space you're trying to move it to, conflict is going to be inevitable. So those patterns where you can start recognizing that conflict is very hard for you is maybe by trying to please everyone during conflict, right? Like you're trying to harmonize everyone. And that's just not going to happen every single time. You're not going to be able to make everyone happy. Other ways are just essentially being unable to work through a conflict. You hang up the phone, you completely avoid it. You try to make yourself as small as possible so that no one can see you. You also let people push boundaries and you avoid hard conversations. Again, in leadership, there is no way you're going to be able to avoid a hard conversation. And this kind of wound stems likely from feeling unsafe being seen and feeling unsafe being able to provide an opinion. Whatever happened in your past, in your experience, in your life that made you feel like it was unsafe for you to provide your opinion and hold your ground, hold your boundary in a space where you're going to be safe no matter the conflict, that's what's showing up at work. Another way that personal wounds could potentially show up at work is by feeling or almost infantilizing yourself, feeling like a kid and infantilizing yourself. I did that a lot early on in my career. I was a junior engineer. I couldn't own up to being an adult. I couldn't own up to accountability. Those things felt really scary. So I preferred to stay in I'm a junior engineer. I'm learning. I'm asking a ton of questions. And I felt the most comfortable in that space. And I stayed in that space as long as possible, even as I was forced into bigger roles and bigger positions. That is obviously me responding from a place of trying to protect myself, trying to make sure that I'm always safe, because if I'm a junior engineer and if I'm an entry-level engineer, I'm always okay if I make a mistake, right? I have a couple more, but I want to skip to the big ones. Last one that I want to talk about. Difficulty trusting yourself. Having a really hard time being able to feel fully accountable and say, yes, I put myself behind this paper or behind this response. I own up to this and I'm comfortable pushing this externally to the client, to the bosses, to the whoever it is. I'm fully comfortable as being in that space and owning myself and needing no validation from anyone else. Getting to that point is really hard. Getting past the point of needing validation through every single step that you take, through every email that you're going to send without second guessing your decisions is very, very difficult. It shows up constantly where you're constantly asking a colleague or your deputy or whoever it is to look over what you've created, to look over your message before you send it out. That likely comes from a place where you felt like your voice didn't matter or that your opinion didn't matter. And that when you did provide an opinion or you did speak up, it was shrunk or it was told that it was wrong. So now you no longer trust yourself or you no longer trust your voice. I guess one more before we end this, because I did this a lot. Self-sabotaging. When you see things are going really well, your career is going very well, you are getting opportunities and you are really going in the direction that you thought you wanted, that you want to take your career because you're putting in the effort, you're healing internally, you're showing up with a lot of self-worth, a lot of confidence, and you're getting that. And all of a sudden it feels scary. It feels not right. So you start self-sabotaging. I did this. It was really hard to recognize that I had done this. I had been provided the opportunity to have two positions, a director level role and a unit lead role. And I was told to choose. I did them both for a year. And at the end of the year, I thought that I was not ready for that director level role and I took the unit lead role. I was ready. I was 100% ready. I would have stumbled maybe a little bit. I would have made a lot of mistakes, but I could have done it. But I didn't. I self-sabotaged a little bit just so that I could feel like I could take my time to get to that position where I felt comfortable owning up to that role. What really stood out to me about this is how the self-sabotaging has a lot to do with feeling like the success doesn't align with who you are. So that success doesn't match your internal worth, which is awful. It's not a good place to be. It's so hard to get yourself to a place of knowing that the success, the role, the salary matches your self-worth. But once you get to a place where you fully embody your self-worth, success almost feels like, yes, that's the path I'm supposed to walk. And it feels natural. It feels comfortable. So in your everyday professional life, start recognizing those patterns. Start recognizing, when do you feel small? What situations at work make you feel a little bit small? Are there times where you're always over explaining or over apologizing? Do you feel guilt for setting boundaries? And start recognizing when your body reacts before your mind even catches up. When do you start feeling that tense in your body, that survival mode starts taking over your body before you even recognize that your mind is thinking, I'm uncomfortable, I don't know how to deal with this situation. Because the moment you start recognizing those patterns is the moment you're already transforming into that leader that you want to become. And there's nothing wrong with you. Your body just learned how to protect you. Okay, that's it. I hope you guys like this video. I love you so much, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye, everyone.